She was the last person anyone looked at when they walked into a room. That was fine. Violet Marsh had learned a long time ago that being overlooked was not the same as being invisible. It just meant people talked freely around her. They argued, strategized, panicked, and confessed, all while she refilled the coffee station 3 feet away. She had worked the overnight reception desk at Callaway & Dunn Financial Group for 4 years. 4 years of transferring calls, signing for packages, printing visitor badges, and saying good morning to people who never said it back. The lobby was hers between midnight and 8 a.m., a quiet, marble-floored kingdom that she knew better than anyone. She knew which partners came in early because they were nervous, and which ones came in early because they were the kind of people who needed to be first. She knew that the VP of Operations kept a spare tie in his bottom desk drawer because he always spilled coffee on his shirt on Thursdays. She knew that the third-floor conference room had a blind spot in the corner where 2 of the exterior camera's fields of view didn't quite meet, not because she was looking for it, but because she noticed things. She always had. What no one knew about Violet was that she had spent 3 of those 4 years quietly completing an MBA online. Night classes after her shift ended, assignments submitted from the small apartment she shared with her younger sister. No one at Callaway & Dunn knew because she hadn't told anyone. There hadn't seemed to be a point. Until the morning of the partners' retreat. It was a Tuesday in March, and the lobby had that particular charged energy it only got before big internal events. Extra security badges, catering carts rolling through, the kind of morning where everyone was moving with purpose and no one was watching the desk. Violet was watching the desk as she always was. At 6:47 a.m., a man she recognized as Preston Holt, Senior Vice President of Client Development, someone who had never once acknowledged her presence, came through the main doors carrying an open laptop and wearing the expression of a man whose day had already collapsed. He was on the phone. "The files aren't syncing, Marcus. I don't know what you did, but the deck isn't pulling the updated projections and the presentation starts in 4 hours. A pause. "No, I can't wait for a tea, just figure it out." He ended the call and stared at the laptop screen like it had personally betrayed him. Violet watched him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Holt." He looked up. He genuinely seemed surprised that she could speak. "If it's a sync issue with the shared drive, there's a manual override in the file settings. It's under advanced sync. You have to uncheck the automatic conflict resolution box and force a fresh pull." She paused. "It usually takes about 40 seconds. Preston stared at her. "You know how to do that?" "I've had to do it a few times for the night audit reports," she said. "Would you like me to show you?" He handed her the laptop without another word. She had the files syncing in under a minute. The updated projections appeared. Preston let out a breath that sounded like it had been held since sometime last week. "Thank you," he said, and he actually meant it. "I'm sorry, I don't. What's your name?" "Violet. Violet Marsh. I work the overnight reception." He looked at her the way people sometimes look at a piece of furniture that suddenly starts talking. "Right, Violet. Thank you." He took the laptop back and walked toward the elevators, already dialing someone else. She went back to the desk. 2 hours later, the lobby began to fill with the company's executive leadership team, filing in for the retreat. Managing partners, regional directors, the heads of every major division. They came in 1s and 2s, suits pressed, voices low, carrying the specific weight of people about to spend a full day deciding things. Violet signed in each guest. She handed out badges. She directed caterers and confirmed room bookings and answered 4 separate calls from the parking garage, and she listened, not intentionally at first. But when you sit behind a desk in a marble lobby and 40 people in expensive shoes flow past you for 2 hours, you hear things. She heard that the firm's largest institutional client, a pension fund that represented nearly 30% of Callaway & Dunn's managed assets, had sent a letter the previous week expressing concerns about strategic direction. She heard 2 partners debate whether the concerns were about the portfolio approach or about the new fee structure. She heard a 3rd partner say that if that client walked, the firm was looking at restructuring within 18 months. She also heard from a conversation that took place entirely too close to her desk for the participants to have been thinking clearly that the firm's proposed solution was a full rebrand and repositioning, a strategy that the head of marketing had spent 6 months developing at considerable expense. And she heard one of the managing partners say, quietly but clearly, The problem isn't our brand. The problem is that we stopped listening to what that client actually needed 3 years ago. Violet wrote that down on the notepad she kept beneath the desk. Not because she planned to do anything with it. Just because she wrote things down, she always had. The retreat was scheduled to run until 5 in the afternoon. At 11:15 a.m., someone from the events team came down to the lobby looking frantic. "The panel just opened the floor for questions," she said, slightly breathless. "One of the partners, Mr. Gerald Dunn, he's asking if anyone in the building has a fresh perspective on the client retention problem. He said he's tired of hearing from people who are too close to it." She looked around the lobby like a fresh perspective might be hiding behind the decorative ficus. "He said he'd take input from anyone." He literally said anyone. Violet looked at her for a moment, then she looked down at her notepad. Then she picked up the phone and called the third-floor conference line. She almost didn't go up. She stood at the elevator bank for a full 90 seconds, badge in hand, telling herself all the reasonable things. She was the overnight receptionist. She had been on shift for over 11 hours. She had not been invited. She was wearing a black cardigan over a white button-down and flat shoes, and every person in that conference room was wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. The elevator arrived. She got in. The conference room on the third floor held approximately 30 people arranged around a long oval table, with additional chairs along the walls. Every seat was taken. Violet stepped inside and stood near the door, and for a moment nobody noticed her at all, which was so familiar she almost smiled. Gerald Dunn, the firm's co-founder, was seated at the head of the table. He was in his late 60s, with the particular stillness of someone who had stopped needing to perform authority decades ago. He was looking at the whiteboard at the front of the room, where a bulleted list of client retention strategies was written in blue marker, none of which were new and most of which were expensive. "We've been looking at this the wrong way," one of the partners was saying. "The rebrand isn't about optics. It's about signaling a shift in philosophy. A shift in philosophy that we haven't actually made," said another voice. "We're still talking about what to tell them, not what to do differently." The room went quiet for a moment. Violet raised her hand. It was not a dramatic gesture. Her arm simply went up, the way it might in a classroom when you knew the answer and were fairly certain no one else did. It was calm. It was deliberate. About 6 people looked at her. Then a few more. Gerald Dunn looked at her last, turning slowly from the whiteboard. "You're not," the head of marketing started, then stopped himself. "I work the overnight reception desk," Violet said. "I've been here since 10 last night. I heard Mr. Dunn say he wanted a fresh I think I have one." The silence that followed was the particular kind that rooms full of powerful people produce when something unexpected happens and no one has decided yet whether to be amused or offended. Preston Holt, sitting halfway down the left side of the table, cleared his throat. "She fixed my laptop sync issue this morning in 45 seconds, he said, to no one in particular. "I say we hear her out." Gerald Dunn leaned back in his chair. "Go ahead," he said. Violet stepped away from the door. She didn't have a presentation. She didn't have slides. She had the notepad she'd carried upstairs and 4 years of paying close attention in a marble lobby. "The client sent a letter about concerns regarding strategic direction," she said. "But from what I've heard this morning, the conversations inside this room are all about what to show them. New brand, new positioning, new language. And I think the managing partner who said you stopped listening to what they needed 3 years ago was right." The managing partner in question, a woman in a dark blazer near the end of the table, sat up slightly. "What they need," Violet continued, "isn't a new presentation. What they need is to feel like this firm knows them, not their portfolio, them. What they're accountable for, what they're afraid of, what they're going to have to explain to their own board." She paused. "You have 4 years of meeting notes with that client. You have emails, calls, quarterly reviews. But when was the last time someone read all of it and asked, what does this client actually worry about when they wake up at 3 in the morning?" The room was very quiet. "That's what I'd want to know if I were sitting across from them," she said. "Not what our rebrand looks like. What keeps them up at night, and what have we done lately to help with that?" She stopped. She had said what she came to say. Gerald Dunn looked at her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Violet Marsh." "How long have you worked here, Violet?" 4 years. "What did you do before this?" "I worked a different overnight desk," she said. And I finished my MBA 6 weeks ago. The head of marketing made a sound that might have been a cough. Sit down, Gerald said. He said it gently, the way you tell someone to sit down when you mean it as an invitation. He looked at the woman in the dark blazer. Annette, pull up the client file. Let's do what she said. Violet did not become CEO that afternoon. She was offered a chair at the table, a cup of coffee she desperately needed, and 3 hours of the most interesting work she'd done since she could remember. The meeting ran past 5 o'clock. Someone ordered sandwiches. At one point, she and Annette rebuilt the entire client relationship timeline on the whiteboard while half the room watched, and the other half took notes. When the meeting finally broke up, Preston found her near the elevator. That was something, he said. I've had 4 years to think about it, she said. He smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him smile. He had a slightly crooked front tooth that made the whole expression friendlier than his face suggested it would be. Gerald wants to set up a follow-up call with you this week. Something more formal. He paused. For what it's worth, the part about what keeps them up at 3 a.m, that was the thing that changed the room. Everyone in there knows their clients' numbers. Nobody had asked that question. People forget to ask the simple questions when the stakes get high, she said. Is that something they teach in MBA programs? He asked. No, she said. That one I learned at the reception desk. She took the elevator back to the lobby, returned the borrowed visitor badge she'd accidentally kept in her pocket, and finished the last 40 minutes of her shift. She signed the handover log for the morning receptionist, gathered her bag, and walked out through the glass doors into the cold March air she allowed herself on the sidewalk. One full breath of something that felt like relief. Or maybe it was the other thing, the thing that lives right next to relief, that arrives after you've done the frightening thing and found that you were still standing when it was done. She texted her sister from the subway platform. Something happened today. Tell you tonight. Her sister responded immediately, as she always did. Good something or bad something? Violet thought about 30 people in a conference room, about a whiteboard covered in a client's 4-year history, about Preston Holt's crooked smile near the elevator. Good, she wrote back. Genuinely good. The follow-up meeting with Gerald Dunn happened 4 days later. It was scheduled for 30 minutes and ran for 2 hours. By the end of it, Violet had been offered a temporary advisory role, officially a project contract, 6 weeks, focused on the institutional client account. She negotiated her own terms. She was polite about it, and she was precise, because she had spent 4 years listening to how negotiations worked when conducted by people who knew what they were doing, and she had taken careful notes. Gerald watched her do it with an expression she would later describe to her sister as pleasantly alarmed. She gave her 2 weeks' notice at the reception desk the following Monday. The 6 weeks became 3 months. The 3 months became a permanent offer. The title on the offer letter said Director of Client Strategy, and when Violet read it, she had to sit very still for a moment with her hands flat on her kitchen table, because the reality of it was larger than the word on the page. She accepted it. She also, on the day she signed, received a message from Preston. It said, "Congratulations. For what it's worth, I noticed you before the conference room. I just didn't know what to do about it." She read it 3 times, which was 2 more times than necessary to understand it. She wrote back, "Thank you. That's a very honest thing to say," he replied. "I've been working on it." They had coffee the following Friday, real coffee, in an actual coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, not in a conference room with an agenda. He asked her what she had thought about during all those overnight shifts. She told him, mostly about systems, about how information moves through organizations and where it gets stuck, about why the most important conversations at companies like Callaway and Dunn almost always happen in hallways and lobbies rather than in meeting rooms, because people lower their guard when they're in motion and in transit. "You were collecting data," he said. "I was paying attention," she said. "It's different." He considered that. How is it different? Collecting data assumes you're looking for something specific. Paying attention means you're open to whatever's actually there. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved past in its usual state of elegant, indifferent chaos. "I've been thinking about the 3 a.m. question," he said finally. "The thing you said in the meeting. What keeps the client up at 3 a.m? He looked at his coffee cup. "I've been asking it about other things, not just clients." She waited. It's a useful question, he said. Turns out it's useful everywhere. She understood what he was saying. She thought it was possibly the most careful thing she had ever heard a person say. What's your answer? She asked. When you ask it about other things. He looked up at her, the crooked tooth again, the expression of someone who had decided to be honest and was somewhat surprised to find it suited him. Currently, he said, I'm mostly kept up thinking about whether I wasted 4 years saying good morning to someone without actually seeing her. Violet set down her coffee cup. You're seeing her now, she said. I know, he said. I'm trying not to waste any more time. The institutional client did not leave. 6 months after the partners' retreat, following a strategy overhaul built in large part on the framework, Violet had outlined in that unscheduled appearance at the conference room door, Callaway and Dunn renewed their contract for 5 years. The announcement was made at an all-staff meeting. Gerald Dunn gave a brief speech. He mentioned by name the person who had walked into a room she hadn't been invited to and asked the question no one else had thought to ask. Violet was sitting in the second row. She had a new badge now, a real one, with her name and her title on it. The person sitting next to her, Preston, who had no reason professionally to sit next to her except that he wanted to, leaned over and said quietly, "How does it feel?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about most things. It feels like I've been paying attention to this building for 4 years, she said, and the building finally paid attention back. He nodded. That's a good way to put it. I know, she said. And then, because she had learned that some things were better said directly than carefully, you're not so bad either. Preston? He laughed, a real one, quiet and a little surprised, the kind people laugh when they're genuinely caught off guard by happiness. Outside the conference room windows, the city carried on the way it always did, indifferent and enormous and full of people paying attention to the wrong things. Violet Marsh had always paid attention to the right ones. That, in the end, was the whole story.